Hey, Brad. Good to see you, my man.
Jason, good afternoon.
It's been a while. The new normal is starting to become very normal.
Yes. The window style communication,
Yeah, no
but
doubt.
good.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Um, real quick, I want to appreciate you jumping on the call with me this afternoon and kind of talking through some of the importance of staying in market. As I went through what can we share with some of our clients and prospects alike, it kind of came to my mind. One of the things we've learned is staying in market is critical now more than ever. Um,
Mhm.
and I think we can share some really good anecdotal stories that we've heard from clients and prospects alike. I think we can certainly share some of our own stories. So I thought
Yeah.
who best to do that than our strategic accounts director at that Frontline Selling. So appreciate you jumping on and being included with me. And want to get started with just kind of positioning the whole conversation today is really around why is it so important to stay in market. And now I'll start with saying I believe that one of the foundations of it comes into the view of we're still in business, so we have to act like we're still in business, right? There's going to be a critical turning point to where if market extraction happens, and it happens at some largely populated moment, then there's going to be no consideration set out there for a solution like ours or like some of our customers and prospects alike. So the consistency and being present in market, I believe, is key. And the first piece I would say, it's because you're still in business, right? What do you think?
Yeah. No, it's first off, I think the timing of the discussion it couldn't be better because the one thing that's consistent right now across nearly every market is this conversation. How do we maintain our presence in market? What does that mean for our business? What markets should we be focusing on? What's the appropriate message and how do we communicate it? So I think there's some unity in areas where there haven't been in some time. So glad to dig into the topic and talk a little bit about what we're hearing across industries with some of our clients. It's interesting as you see the different reactions that businesses have. The front runners out there are the folks who have their executive leadership and their team members almost over communicating, speaking to in as public of a way as possible to define their company's stance, their company's relevance in the market. I don't know if you saw Dave McLennan on Cargill talking about addressing some of the hype around the meat industry right now, but being front and center to say, here's the reality, here's the position, and here's how we're going to continue to support the market. I think that's equally as critical as you look at any area in business to business sales and marketing, because if you're not out there communicating to the market right now, then it starts to raise the question, are you relevant? Do you have a viable business model and solution to begin with?
Right. Do you think that some of it comes down to, I think one of the critical pieces is that, we do know there's going to be some market extraction, right? It's just going to happen. There's going to be people that make immediate short-term and then long-term decisions. And with that immediate saying, we got to figure out how we fit. We got to figure out what we need to say. We got to figure out how we can be more empathetic. With that pull out from the market, do you believe that part of the critical nature of being in market with a solution that is agile and can move in the space of how do we make messaging more empathetic? How do we maybe switch to personas that aren't necessarily directly impacted by COVID? How do we maintain positioning in the marketplace by maybe shifting a little bit, but share a voice that increases with staying in market? Do you believe that that's a critical factor into saying that, hey, with either stagnant or even reduced efforts to some degree, your share of voice is still going to rise because because some of the market has pulled out.
You know, you bring up a really interesting and solid point. When you mentioned empathy, Jason, it's probably the most critical piece to any outreach, because you hear a lot of tone deaf advertisement that kind of continued through March, and organizations started to shift in April, realizing that, you know, situations are real. Markets are trying to adapt to it. So the empathy piece is critical, and also the personas, just like to a certain extent it always has been, but I think it's taken on another level of importance. Personas meaning, you know, who are we communicating to in the business that we're reaching out to, and trying to get a genuine understanding of how they're addressing the current market. In some cases, we've seen a large scale shift in the whole business to market structure. Have an interesting point with one of our clients in the medical space that has pivoted from going after health systems into helping with regional access centers. So they're helping at a state level now, which in turn believe that over the long term is going to be a significant lift in their business. But it started with, how can we help? Where are our solutions viable? And then building the message around, this is what it means to the market, and communicating that to the market in a very specific way to get in front of the right personas that are dealing with some of these challenges. So they're helping specifically right now in the state of Arizona, where they've created what they call a surge line to help get people to the right places to be taken care of. But it was a full shift of the business model, and it was a very interesting strategy to be a part of, to help with that kind of a shift in a short period of time. You know, I had a conversation just the other day, Jason, with a chief marketing officer in the engineering, design, and construction space, and it just underlined the fact that some things don't change. This is the age-old gap between marketing and sales, and they have a good, strong business. They've shifted their focus into the government sector because of the high increase in demand, as makes sense, and they should. The challenge that the CMO is having is raising the concern of what the long-term impact will be if they're not in market. So by not having conferences, by not having any active campaigns to communicate their value to some of their more traditional market segments, believes that there's going to be a substantial risk if they don't tackle that. So there's still some disparities, inside of businesses, and that's where I believe that it's critical to have, some sharing of insight and strategy, and being able to speak with authenticity in your industry.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. One I've often thought about when we have these moments of what do we say, where do we say it, and where do we remain, and part of that, it comes from stability, and it's not just, as you just said, it's not short term, it's long term stability. And you bring up a great point with the events. That's a piece right now where we're seeing with some of the clients that I've talked to and prospects alike, we've seen a decrease in 25 to 35% lead generation because of the cancellation of events. And where do you narrow that gap? That's a wide span, anywhere from 25 to 35% of your overall lead generation for a 12-month period. And the question remains, how do you narrow that? And if you don't narrow that, what does it do to your stability and your long-term approach? So I think that's another very, very relevant reason to continue to try and capture share of voice at this time and stay in market with, again, exercising all the things we've talked about, right? Being responsible, being understanding of personas, and delivering an empathetic message.
Absolutely. It's interesting in some market segments being in tighter conditions than others. An example of retail, where it's feast or famine. There's either an excessive amount of activity, it's difficult to keep up and keep shelves stocked, or the exact opposite, where stores are shut down and over 55% of the retail floor space across the United States, as of a few weeks ago, was the metric that was put out. So difficult segment there. But if you look at some of the correlated areas that impact that, one of our client segments in transportation, has seen a substantial lift because organizations are trying to tackle efficiency, profitability while meeting this higher level of demand. So it's interesting to see, and it certainly, to your point, Jason, has to be tailored to the specific conditions of the market.
Right.
But buying hasn't stopped. In some cases, it's slowed, and it will return. So it's an opportunity right now where less effort is required in order to get mind share in the market. But it's critical to be able to speak into the market. We see some organizations that have had to withdraw, understandably so, but really the front runners here again are the ones that are able to take a position and maybe hone in on a certain segment within their client base or two and say, this is where we can really bring value right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, one of the other pieces that I always kind of bullet in this discussion is around consideration set, and exactly what you said. It's buying hasn't stopped. It's slowed significantly, but decision making hasn't stopped either, but it's just slowed as well. So even though there are tightening on budgets, and we understand that, right, until there's more clarity, but I believe we've seen more clarity over the last 3 weeks than we've seen the 3 weeks previous, and then the 3 weeks previous to that, right? So it's progressing to the point where folks are starting to see some clarity and settling into the new normal. And even though, again, the decisions have slowed and budgets may have been constricted, they haven't stopped, and consideration sets are still being built. And I believe that's another reason for folks to be, I don't want to say take advantage, because that's not the phrase you want to use, but it's, to be in market at this point in time with a message that helps them. Again, we always go back to this immediate, short-term, long-term. And if you're looking at it short-term, the answer for most people is, I'm out. I'm pulling out. I'm extracting from the market. We have to pivot and make something else happen. But long-term, I believe you have to remain and continue to build your value inside these consideration sets that are happening right now. The noise is lower, and things are still building to how do we come out of the back half of this. And if you have a solution,
it's
go ahead.
Really interesting as we look at the timeline. And to your point, there's certain stages of the evolution and this that we've seen. But mid to late March, almost everyone was kind of in a shell-shocked scramble type of a mode. Can't talk right now, trying to figure out what's going on. A little bit of that bled into April, but as we've gotten into the end of April and early May, I've seen really a large-scale shift into the conversation. Many more people are trying to get in, contact with people, picking up the phone, having discussions, trying to figure out the strategy now, because we're starting to realize it might not go back to what it was, right? For a foreseeable period of time. We still have goals that we have to meet. So I would say, to your comment earlier, certainly not taking advantage in situations, but all about preparation in order to execute. And if you're not engaging in the discussion now while everybody's at this level set period and preparing, and the business is going to miss an opportunity to execute. And good fundamental sales is always built around value. So we're not waiting. Order takers are going to have a hard time in this market unless you're in some areas of commodities, right? But strategic business to business sales is going to be on value. And right now, no better opportunity to add value to potential clients than to share perspective, have dialogues, and help them with the planning to where, to your point, they may not have budgets currently. A lot of budgets have been frozen, and many of my clients that I'm speaking with are talking about the free up period being mid-May to the end of the month. So the planning period is critical in order for us to execute and to help our clients execute and rebound and exceed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think, you said a few things that were as interesting there. It led me down a path when I was listening to you. part of what I'm seeing in this opportunity, I'll call it forever the optimist, right? The ability to shift, and we talk about personas a lot. We talk about messaging, empathy, but shifting to a different product or service that has a lower barrier to entry. So to your point, possibly not commoditized, but something that has a much lower barrier to entry inside of a target account. And another reason to stay in market is to be able to strengthen those other offerings. I know it's really hard to get inside an organization and work your way up, much easier to get in and work your way down. But it seems to me that there's opportunity there as well to shift a little bit of your offerings or products to get inside a key account and hopefully metastasize over the course of these next 8 to 12 months, where decision making is going to continue to expand and possibly get some additional exposure that you might or might not have had because you're not focusing necessarily on that entry point.
Yeah, and great point, because think about the value there. If you're able to come in and remove some of the obstacles or barriers of entry, and leaning into your strong suits as an organization, maybe you have a strong implementation process. If you can remove some of the initial financial burdens from a client in order to stand up, no better impact and a positive light to a new partnership that, if it's the right type of client, will yield dividends over the course of a long-term relationship. I had a conversation last week with a COO of one of the leading information security businesses globally, and this is one of those spaces where that segment's doing really well. They had a really strong first quarter. They're on track to doing a really strong second quarter. But when you look at opportunities in new business ventures in that space, couldn't line up more perfectly to where, security's a risk. Everybody's virtual now. People are trying to deal with new infrastructure requirements for that. Why not try to meet clients where they are, maybe have a lower barrier of entry, and then great opportunity to capture market and expand. So, and not done in a hoodwinked type of a way. It's upfront business and saying, this is how we can help, and here's what we would propose to get started, to help folks over the course of the next couple of months, and then extend into a typical regular client relationship. Knowing that every business can't do that, one of your earlier comments that we've seen some really powerful success stories with our current clients are, if you can focus on a industry segment that may be underaddressed in your business, may just be a much more viable opportunity based on current market conditions. How can you stand up an approach to really maximize that area of the business right now, where everybody's dealing in most cases with some dead time? We don't have, either we have people that are overworking, or we may have some resources that, in some of my consulting, clients' businesses, they've had to slow down in some areas of the business. So if they can reshift focus and address a new market segment, expand that, no better opportunity. And I think one of the other challenges that kind of brings to light is many organizations currently have, there's some organizations that have had to reduce force. So they're trying to tackle growth objectives with less resources available. And we've seen an increase in conversations about outsourcing work and trying to bridge a gap in meeting objectives, and then helping scale the organization back into its traditional growth mode and bringing folks back inside. So it's been some interesting discussions in different segments of the industry for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned something there. You talk about scaling back up, but it's one of the things I always lean towards on this as well is, it's hard to beat somebody from a dead stop. So, this rolling kind of start, the idea of kind of accelerating through the turn, right? Accelerating through the back half of this year. It's difficult to do that if you've completely stopped, which is another reason that keep maintaining momentum and having meaningful conversations right now is critical. If you withdraw from the marketplace, that acceleration and that ability to rebound in the back half of 2020 will be significantly more difficult. It's going to be difficult for a lot of folks anyway, but it'll be highly less likely to have an impact in 2020 if you haven't maintained some momentum going through this 90-day cycle.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because some organizations they've been forced to stop. Others have been more in limbo of what should we do, and as a result have been a little bit more paralyzed. But what we're seeing with the folks that are continuing to engage is there's never been more discussions and conversations and new business outreach. We haven't seen this many in the last 20 years. And it's an opportunity, but you have to be careful with, there has to be a discipline and process in place into, how you're reaching out, what's the objective and intent, and having a really controlled process around the execution piece in order to make it a positive branding experience versus a negative. Because I don't know about you, but there have been a few emails that have flooded my inbox that I've not only turned off but will never respond to because it's been a negative, experience to me. But people, it seems, have leaned in stronger than ever into the human-to-human aspect of communicating. We need community, and I don't know if it's being forced to have more distance that's created this, but as a result, the organizations that are staying in market are getting stronger impressions with folks that are picking up the phone.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I have on one of my notes in my book that I carry to most of our meetings, you've seen it, is humanization is critical, right? So bringing that humanization to this process and understanding that we're all going through this, right? So I've been on some calls with cycles that have started prior to COVID and myself being the buyer, and they've avoided the conversation. They've avoided talking about it, but it's the elephant in the room, so to speak, and it's okay to bring it up, and it's okay to just have a discussion about it, because again, that's what humans do. And I believe that's how you make deeper connections with folks. And I think that the humanization piece of all of this is critical. And it's something I've talked about for a very long time, but it's like you said, it's now more than ever. I believe it is, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more critical than it's ever been before, because, and perhaps it is the distance, the force of distancing. It makes us want to relate more and want to be able to relate more. So I do believe that's a critical piece to outlook, which is interesting because the second piece of the things that I wanted to talk about in the series of webcasts is messaging and why it's important, and how do you translate it into a message that delivers all of the above, right? The empathy, the human-to-human aspect of things, the challenges that people are facing, and the solution that's available to solve it. So that's a really nice segue, completely and 100% unrehearsed. So that was nice. So as we look and through our outreach and the things that we've seen, it's, the new normal is shifting, right? And it's, you're starting to see conversations increasing because of that shift, because people are getting more and more comfortable where they are, or just maybe more, in a routine. And sometimes routine leads to comfort. Sometimes routines are very uncomfortable, but whatever it may be, the new normal is shifting and conversations are increasing because of it. I think we're seeing timelines be a little more defined. So as you start to see where does the valley in this peak and valley of COVID, we don't know exactly where the bottom of the peak is, but I feel like we're starting to see some of the uptick and processes leading to more meaningful conversations, more defined timelines. And again, decisions are being made. They're just being slowed a little bit. And all of this lends itself to, we have to be in market. We have to be in front of the accounts and the people that matter. And we have to do it in a form of humanization and empathy, and in order to drive meaningful conversations.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Well, look, I think we're running up right on 25 minutes, and that's again unrehearsed. Nice job. I think this is uncanny. So
well, thanks for calling the conversation. I think it's important, even in our environment, that we have communication. We have an interesting lens to market conditions, being that we reach out across so many different verticals and regional demographics. So enjoyed the conversation, Jason.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for accepting. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but always good to see you. And we'll look forward to being able to see you in the office sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Brad. Have a great day, bud.